This is JYoung. I'm the president of the U.S. chapter of IARF, and this is the first of what will be a monthly series, alternating between members of our board talking about their ways of practicing global spirituality and uh, members of our board and others speaking about the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so thank you very much for joining us. I will normally be the convener, but I will not normally be the speaker. I'm speaking now, and I think at the end of the year. But there'll be a series of others. George Garland, who's on the screen with us here, is the speaker.
Hi, John.
Cooney is Professor Cooney is the uh, speaker the month after that. So I'm going to try to accomplish two primary things in my presentation today. And either of them, of course, could take hours. We don't have hours.
Presentation, but they also have. I know they're there. Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, okay. We're taking a photo.
we need people to turn off their mics, I think, except for me for the moment. Okay. So we don't have other things going on. So my argument is that humans are rapidly becoming a global global society. Billions are within the electronic grasp of the world, and we can see, read, and hear about countries, cultures, and peoples different from ourselves. We are regularly confronted by brave, brilliant, virtuous, and faithful people with different views of reality than our own. It's apparent that each person has part of the truth, and that no individual, group, faith, or nation has all of the truth, and that we will need our global variety and diversity to survive and flourish in the 21st century. More than 2 billion of our 8 billion humans want to or already do share knowledge, collaborate on scientific research and technological innovations, and regularly communicate and cooperate far beyond their local communities. 1.5 billion can communicate in English, and more than 500 million have a college degree. Since most of us are already functional globalists, why would we fail to also not become practitioners of global spirituality? Mixed marriages across ethnic and often also religious lines are not only common in the US, but across the world. Most human beings are interested in getting to know people who are different from themselves. Now, I want to also share with you how I define spirituality and religion, because my view of these two things are very inclusive. For me, spirituality is how people relate to how they perceive and understand reality and their places and purposes within reality. The big picture, the beyond now and beyond us portions of reality. While religion is how we participate with other people in shared enterprises, from casual conversations to international treaties. So for me, every person is both spiritual and religious because everyone has understandings of reality and they all participate with other people in shared enterprises. Now, I will, in the course of this time, hopefully have time to give you examples from my own life, because my strong feeling is that we don't have the same faith the whole time in our lives. Our view of reality, of our view of what the spiritual is, certainly is different when I'm a toddler than when I am now at 80 years old. And so that varies as we age and mature, if hopefully. And also we vary in personality, and therefore some people tend to experience their life in certain ways and others in other ways, and those are different, and that's part of the richness of our human experience with each other. And part of the wonders of, for me, spirituality and religion are that allows us to talk across what could be these boundaries between our different human personalities. And so an introvert can talk with an extrovert. A person who is focused on their body can talk with a person who has concentrated on what is in their mind. The scientist who thinks primarily in terms of science can talk with the mystic whose experience may be very different and experiences. So the Dalai Lama, for instance, as you know, thinks that people ought to be looking at science, that maybe science is the future. And I like a quote from if I can find it.
Call Kathleen.
No, I've got it. This is Dr. Francis S. Collins, the geneticist who led the Human Genome Project as director of our U.S. Institutes of Health. At its most fundamental level, it's a miracle that there is a universe at all. It's a miracle that it has order, fine-tuning that allows the possibility of complexity, and laws that follow precise mathematical formulas. Contemplating this, an open-minded observer is almost forced to conclude that there must be a mind behind all this. To me, this qualifies as a miracle, a profound truth that lies outside of scientific explanation. My experience as a minister for 40 years is that people, regardless of their sense of what reality is and what they're comfortable talking about and owning up to, is that they all think that there's something going on in the universe, because otherwise, why would we stay alive? If it is all just a veil of suffering and pain, and there really isn't purpose, there is no purpose in the universe, why would we live? And so ever since I read existentialism as an undergraduate, I thought, okay, now that makes sense. As Camus said, if you didn't think there was something going on, you'd commit suicide. And, that if there wasn't order, if there wasn't meaning in the universe. I grew up in a little Kansas town. Nobody in my birth family went to church regularly. My father had had far too much of evangelical Christianity by the time he became an adult. And when I was about 4 years old, my mom was pregnant with my younger brother, and my older sister had gotten married, and she'd been a kind of a second mom to me. And I realized I needed to grow up quickly, because mom was not going to be there. I was not going to be the center of her universe anymore. And my sister was gone. So I started making other adult friends. I started getting out more in the world. And my mom, on a spring day, sat down and effectively said to me that the world was a wonderful place, that it was vast and complicated and constantly changing, and that people's purpose in their lives was to find their distinct roles in the universe and practice them as best they could. And frankly, that's what I've tried to do ever since. So, my faith in that sense is based on nature mysticism. And that was my first opening into the big picture, was nature. I think my second was music, because music for me and my parents, they had recordings done all the time. They both played the piano. And the closest my dad got to church was the Texaco Opera Showcase on radio on Saturdays. And so I imbued from them a real love for music. And then I started playing the piano myself. And so that gave me an access that I've had to this day. And I frankly don't get through a day without finding spirituality in nature and finding it in music. In effect, God talks to me every day. It may be Bach, it may be Brubeck, it may be Ray Charles, but music is there and it's an important part of it. And that was another window. I think my third window was talking and then reading, because my parents discussed things openly in the house. We didn't have a Bible on the corner table. We had a dictionary. And if my parents couldn't figure out anything else to discuss, they would discuss a word, usually arguing, but arguing in good humor and enjoying themselves. And so, by the time I could talk, I was pretty much participating in those conversations. And then when I went to school and I could read, it was just like another miracle. And then I discovered the Carnegie Public Library that I could ride to on my bike, and that opened that world. And so that whole world of reading, of literature, of fiction, nonfiction, history, geography, all these different things opened up. And I made friends with the librarians and whoever else was at the library. So that was an important opening to me. And those three were there before I ever went to church. I started playing the piano at 10, and my piano teacher, who was a Christian Scientist, invited me to come play for the Wednesday night healing services. And then the Episcopal lady down the street talked me into playing for the Sunday school at the Episcopal church. And soon I was the assistant organist. And so twice a week I was in service. But when I came home from services, then my dad would say, well, what were they talking about? And then he would try to straighten me out if he thought I was being misled. So I was learning about religion. I was experiencing it, but I was experiencing it as a if you will, as an outside observer, as a witnessing consciousness to this experience. I was learning. I read through the Bible twice along with all the rest of my reading by the time I was in high school. But I didn't join a church until I went to the Unitarian Church in Wichita, Kansas, when I was a college freshman, and joined then. And so that, was when I became religious in the organizational sense. But the point I'm trying to make, I think, at this point, is that I already had communities while I was going along. It wasn't like I didn't have a spiritual community. First it was my family, then it was my neighborhood, then it was the schools, then it was the library and the town. And growing up lower middle class in my little town with, whoever was in the town was in the school. So we had a variety of different people. I had a friend in third grade that lived in a chicken coop with his alcoholic dad, and my mom would invite him over to our house so he would get a meal and could study without his dad bothering him. So I was confronted early with people of different ethnicities and different economic situations, and that was important. And I also learned early that I ought to be working, that I needed to be earning my keep, not just at home, but out in the world. And so I had jobs all the way through from 10 years old on. And I was widening, but also by the time I was in high school, when I was 13, I was helping a man clean out his garage in the neighborhood. And he gave me 2 books, Gandhi's Experiments with Truth and a book on yoga. And so I started doing yoga at 13, and I do it still. And I became a practitioner, and Gandhi was really my first and lasting hero. So here in our senior community, I have Gandhi and Martin Luther King out on my wall outside our room because they're central people for me. And I am a big advocate for having models and heroes. Uh, Part of what, of course, I found out in as a teenager uh, when I got involved in civil rights is that my two main models, my dad and my maternal grandfather, were both in different ways racists. My dad had black friends. He had black friends that he liked very much and interacted with regularly, but he also made racial comments. He was still making them after I was married to a dark chocolate brown woman from India, and not about her, of course. He didn't dare to do that. But when he first got to visit us in Chicago and he was in the car, he started making comments, and I said to him, "Okay, Dad, you're on my turf, you're in my car, you're with my dark-skinned wife, and that's not going to go. We can't do that." And my maternal grandfather, my model, grew up as a Southern gentleman, and he was a wonderful man, a very sweet and fair man, and a city councilman and mayor and so forth in Wichita. And he was fine interacting with people, but when we went in the hospital cafeteria after his wife had a stroke, he wouldn't sit down in the cafeteria because there were black people eating there and not just serving there. And I thought, my Lord. So there, my models were imperfect. And of course, I found out researching Gandhi that Gandhi was imperfect, that Martin Luther King was imperfect, you know, and that kind of helped me see religion in a different way. So then when I looked at Jesus, of course, Jesus wasn't perfect either. When I looked at Buddha, Buddha wasn't perfect either. I mean, there is no perfect. If you're a human being, you're imperfect. I mean, that's the name of the game. But that's okay. I mean, that's okay from my standpoint. So my world kept expanding, but in adolescence, it also got more complicated in that I was face to face with the fact that the world was often unjust, that even my models and mentors were unfair and imperfect. And I think that helped me go forward into life and probably be a lot better minister than if I'd had a different kind of view. So when I was going to be a political science professor, but I was a 60s radical. And so I got in so much trouble with my department by the time I finished my doctoral courses that they wouldn't let me pass my exams and go on to write my dissertation. And I had proposed to my Jain, Hindu, Indian wife to be, and she had accepted, but she thought she was marrying a would-be professor, and suddenly she was going to be going to be the wife of a would-be seminarian with unclear prospects. So I had to go back and propose a second time, and blessings be, she accepted. But I didn't really go to seminary knowing if I would be a minister or not. But by the end of the first year, I thought, I get to really be with people that want to be with me, because you don't go to a Unitarian church unless you want to be there. And they're really smart people. And that will allow me to be as thoughtful and intellectual as I can be, and that'll be fine with them. And at the same time, they really want me to be an activist. It's part of the job. So that seemed like a great thing for me. And I loved working with all ages of people. And so that was a very big part of the life. In my first real pastorate in Bloomington, Indiana, a college town, I learned Zen meditation from two elderly women. And I had mentors that 3 of the 4 were a generation older than me, men that I met with regularly. and I did my first therapy, and I became a father, and I probably learned a lot more from the people in the congregation than they did from me, but they put up with me for 7 years. And Ann Greenwood, that's on the screen with us, was in the congregation and was helping me along. When I went on to Paramus, New Jersey, there I was very involved with the UN office and with IARF as its president, helped lead a tour to India and so forth, and got to know India for the first time, really, 2 years after I was married. I was doing research on Gandhi during the Gandhi centenary year and got to interview 100 Gandhians, and everybody from villagers to the future prime ministers. So it was a great experience. And then I had a month in Japan with Kankokyo and my friend Yoshi Matsuda, who had been a fellow graduate student at Meadville. And we'd become fast friends and got to know what their mediation process was all about. So 2 wonderful experiences. And I've been greatly privileged, as some of you have, the rest of my life to do a lot of international traveling and be really often directly with people and not just touring monuments. So that's been a great blessing, and it's kept expanding my horizons. And I, of course, as I got to know these other cultures, I mean, it was obvious, yes, the people were very different. They'd had very different experiences, but also there was a lot of overlap in what we experienced, how we experienced. And I found then in every faith, as I got to know it, things that I could learn and things that I could grow from. The book that I published in 2022 was about global spirituality, and it's this is what it looks like. What I do? Oh, that's not working. There we go. You can't see it really. So it's Nurture Your Spiritual Path, Exploring the Rainbow of Belief. And basically what it does, it takes it through. It's not telling you that you should stop practicing your own religion. It says you can be enriched by learning from these other religions. And I really think that if you learn enough about each of the global religions, that there are things that you can benefit from practicing in your own practices. And of course, mine was much enriched in that I was with Indians a great deal, and ended up being, besides the grandmother and grandfather that were alive my first trip, probably the most spiritually interested in the family. And so they were delighted, and I ended up with a bunch of their icons that I now have on my walls. And I urge you to consider, and probably many of you do, have some kind of way of paying respects to your models and mentors, whether they're human beings or mythic figures or religious icons. I have Hindu monuments, Hindu icons, and Buddhist icons, and a Jesus from Israel, and so on and so forth, and a Mary Magdalene from Grace Cathedral, so in San Francisco. So I advocate you're doing that. Some people may simply have members of their family, but I think most of us have had mentors in our lives that we cherish, and I think it's worthwhile to keep them as part of who we celebrate. What is prayer for me? Well, for me, it's a way of my talking to that big picture. And no, it doesn't usually directly speak back to me. I have, I guess, had a good many classical religious experiences in the sense of really feeling at one with the universe, or really feeling that I was in touch with some kind of ultimate. But it's not like I asked for something particular and it came on a silver platter the next day or ever. So to me, it's that we're all in dialogue with what we understand reality to be. Sometimes we do that with great disappointment. And I think one of the great pluses for me of Judaism is that the Jews basically feel like they can talk back to God. And a lot of their stories sort of say that, you know, that they're in dialogue with God rather than it being a one-way street and God has it right all the time. So that goes along with me. For me, Martin Buber's ideas of God in the between seems to make a lot of sense. My spiritual practice in a daily life is maybe in many ways more Hindu and Buddhist than Western, in the sense that for me, meditation is very important. And as I'm sure many of you, maybe all of you, practice meditation in one way or the another. I think some people don't call it meditation, they just sit and think. But if that's what they're doing and they get beyond simply the scurrying around of the moment in your head, then I think they are learning things that are important. So for me, usually meditating means taking some moments, some minutes to get past the monkey mind of our daily lives, and then to be able to focus on something that's of importance to me at that time, and trying to stay there as a witnessing consciousness. I love Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk from Vietnam originally and a great activist that I had the blessing of spending a week in silent retreat with. He basically argued that any regularly practiced activity could become a form of meditation. So he urged you to meditate if you were stuck in traffic regularly. He urged you to do it in other things like that. And I found, frankly, when he talked about that, I realized that since I was a kid, because my mom was tired of washing dishes by the time my younger brother came along. And so, since I was about 6, I was washing dishes, and both wives have wanted me to do that too. So that's a part of my daily practice. And I see it as a form of meditation. And sometimes it's a very rich form of meditation for me. So prayer is important to me on a daily basis. When I get up in the morning, I put my head on my yoga mat and basically like Muslims do, not because I'm praying to Allah, but because I'm submitting to the universe as the Muslims do, saying that we're part of this bigger picture and it's in charge. We're not really in charge. And then I do things like yoga and Tai Chi that I think also can take your body into a different way. Now I'm walking rather than biking or running, but all these forms that we use, whether they are perceived as secular or religious, all can be forms that take us to a different place. Certainly playing the piano has been that for me. And can take me into a different zone on a regular basis. I suppose I've had most of my day-to-day religious experiences in dialogue with other people. And I need a congregation. I need communities. In fact, I have consistently found I need a bunch of them. I'm not even satisfied with just one. And so that was the great help to me as an activist, because I would have a congregation that I was serving, but I would also have friends outside the congregation, colleagues, ministerial colleagues, and people from other denominations, but also just people in the community doing other kinds of activism that I was involved in. And then when I was in the last 10 years of my ministry, I was also able to go back and be again a college teacher. And that was a wonderful experience for me. I taught nonviolence and religions of India and world religions, and taught a course on liberal religion and a course on combining spiritual practices and activism. And then I got to teach with Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Truth and Reconciliation, which was a wonderful experience. I think I got to do it because I had been to South Africa and I had gotten arrested briefly in New York for blocking the consulate, the South African consulate during the protests, and I was a minister, and so it was a huge class, 300 and some members. So great experience, and a wonderful person, certainly a mentor to me too. So I am urging people really to look at the different world religions, learn from them, if at all possible, interact, and we now richly have the possibility, I think, of doing that, of experiencing people from other religions, because we are now, the United States is now the most religiously diverse nation on earth. We have more different kinds of Buddhist sanghas than Japan. You know, amazing, you know. And Diane Eck and her pluralism project that I was able to participate in when I was a fellow up there at Harvard in the midst of my career, well, you know, it's a wonderful example of that. There's so much we can learn from other religions, and we have the chance. Probably your dentist or your doctor or your accountant is a person from a different faith. Have you asked her or him how do they practice their religion? What do they believe now? How has it been affected by their learning of science and their education and so on? I mean, I think we need to spend more time talking about religion with one another. And I think that's a great opportunity for IRF. But even in IRF, I feel like too often it's been sort of, okay, I'll show you my religion and show you a ceremony, and then you show me mine. But then that's it. I mean, there's not like, okay, let's actually practice this. Let's actually figure out maybe a way that I can use this in what I practice. I know there will be people, and I'm sure there would be good questions about this. Is this cultural appropriation? Well, I guess my answer to that is all life, everybody's human experience is cultural appropriation. I mean, if you didn't grow up speaking English and you speak English, that's a cultural appropriation. You know, if you wear Western clothes, that's cultural appropriation. So I understand that there may be certain rituals or traditions that people feel should only be for their own faith. But I think in most cases, people in one tradition are open to people in another tradition experiencing that. And I've had the great blessing of, you know, being able to do Shinto purification experiences and Buddhist meditation experiences with people in those traditions, and Hindu experiences, and go on Jain pilgrimages. And be with Jews and doing Jewish rituals and being with Christians. I even got to help with communion at the cathedral in New York because my Japanese Brazilian Episcopalian colleague from my Harvard experience was there, and so they said, "Well, you're here with us, so help us with communion." So glad to do it. But so I think I'm nearing the end of my time, and I would be glad to turn it over to the audience. Maybe it might be best if you hold up your hands and unmute yourself when you ask a question or make a comment, but I look forward to talking with you about it. Hopefully, I didn't put people to sleep. Yes, Katz?
Good, good afternoon, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. I'm from Japan.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your so many experience. Yeah, it's so amazing. It's so inspire me to more communication with diverse people. Thank you very much for your wonderful experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, one of the things that, and please correct me if I'm not saying this right, but AMAE, AMAE, that concept has been so much of my experience with Japan and with Japanese people. The sense that you should be able to intuit what people are thinking. And I have a wonderful story from my time with Yoshi Matsuda when I was visiting the different Konkokyo groups, because I was being shown around regularly, and I was with my Indian wife, and so she was included in everything. And we were most of the way through the month, and Yoshi had been sleeping in the room with us, and one of the older Konkokyo mediators suddenly looked very serious when started talking in Japanese to my friend Yoshi, and Yoshi got very solemn. And then Yoshi explained to me that the older minister had said, "Well, how long have John and Madhavi been married?" And he said, "Well, I think only a couple of years." And he said, "And you're sleeping in the same room with them all the time?" And so then for the rest of the month, we had a separate bedroom from Yoshi. But and he was upset about that. But I mean, generally, my experience has been, and I wish I could be, as successfully intuitive about other people as I have found my Japanese friends and companions and colleagues to be. Who's next?
This is Janice, and I can go next.
Please.
Have such rich experiences and such experiences that cross so many borders. What would you tell young people today about how they might choose to be introduced to and navigate different worlds?
That's a great question. I think any experience that young people can have actually interacting with people from other cultures is wonderful. And again, I mean, that is so much easier in a sense than it was earlier, in that, they probably, most people have people in their schools, or people in their neighborhood that are different. I know that thing that I did, probably starting because of my teenage civil rights things, is that I would just make it a point throughout my life, if I was in a gathering and there was people that were visibly different from me, and I had a chance to sit down with him, I would sit down with him. And, sometimes that wasn't particularly welcome initially, as Janice probably knows, but, and others of us may have encountered. But over time, it made a difference. I know so I think if they have a chance to go abroad, wonderful, but that's not going to happen for everybody all the time. But you don't have to go abroad to get to know people that are different. And I'm making a point of it here in the senior community we live in now. Right now I'm reading the oral history of a wonderful Japanese woman who, of course, being the age she is, was in the camps and spent a time in Japan. Then, because after the war, because her dad went to help the American soldiers translate with the Japanese, and so she started on a farm outside of Sacramento. She spent time in a in a camp during the horrible way we treated the Japanese during World War II in Utah, and then she spent time in Japan and then came back to the States, and so has had these different experiences. And the world is just rich at this point with people that have multicultural, they've had these different experiences, they can talk about it. But a lot of times I think people feel like maybe they shouldn't go there. And I guess, again, as maybe Janice, your upbringing was too. I mean, basically, my parents thought it was okay to talk with people about whatever. And,
Yeah,
and so,
very true.
and so I just started doing that from a young age. And of course, in the course of my life, it's gotten me in big trouble a few times, but the payoff has been worth it on the other side.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, John. This has been, I agree with Cuts. This very inspiring. Thank you so much for
Well,
this.
thank you, and thank you for being here. And Janice was a very important part of our board when she could wedge it into her almost impossible schedule. How's your new job? Is it good?
It's keeping me busy.
Oh yeah, I bet.
It's good though. It's keeping me busy and I'm enjoying it. Thank you so much.
Good. Well, you look very healthy and even relaxed. So that's wonderful. Who's next? And you.
Good morning. Can I say something?
Yes,
Thank you very
please.
much, Dr. JYoung, for your presentation. Now, I think that diversity, anything has two sides, positive and negative. For example, diversity is neutral because it has two sides. Negativity, what is the negativity of diversity? That's a conflict, antagonist. That's the negative side. But at the same time, diversity brings us understanding and cooperation. Now, please allow me to speak on this problem from the Buddhist point of view. Now, Buddhist point of view is very much emphasize on as it isness and suchness. Now, I see the faces on this screen, maybe 10 or 11 people. Now, what is the suchness or as it isness permeates the faces on this screen? What is that? Now, there's a different shapes of eyes, of faces, forms, appearance, all different, colors different. Now, what is as it isness? what is suchness? To me, suchness is only the dots, flickering, blinking, flashing dots on the screen. That's suchness as it isness. So, example, we are all different, but what is the suchness or as it isnness of people? Nationality, sex, or religion, all different. But suchness is we have eyes, nose, ears, the bodies, the mind. That's the suchnesses. So I think that suchness or as it isness can transcend all differences of the world, even the religion, ethnicity, sex, all kinds of things. That's my notion about suchnesses. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Michinori, and thank you for sharing that. And I guess, please correct me, but I think suchness or isness, in a sense, is another word for the big picture, for the ultimate reality. It's just not, and frankly, I mean, my own view of this is creation. So it's a whole, it's this continuous unfolding. And of course it's changing. And of course, in a sense, it's ephemeral. It's not going to stay the same. I'm in a decade or so, I will be ashes. And so, but also, I will be a memory or memories in the minds of my children and grandchildren, hopefully, and perhaps a few good memories with friends and even with congregants. Part of the wonders of those of you who are in congregations or serve congregations is that people do. They come back. They do say things. They do connect with you. Part of the pain for me of being aged is that sometimes they come and share rich experiences with me, and I don't remember who they are. I don't remember their names. That was one of the reasons that I decided at 66 that it was time to retire, because I couldn't remember all 400 people. So I could remember a lot of things about them, good and maybe not so good in some cases, but I couldn't always remember the names. And I thought, okay, well, it's time to retire. And what a blessing we have in modern life, in that, so many of us can get to the age that we are today and be alive and savoring life and even having our faculties, if not as spry limbs as we used to have. And Michinori, I love your painting behind you, your face screen of the Jesus and the Buddha in dialogue.
That's right. That's right. I like this picture very much.
It's a great picture. Yeah. Esther Sitter, you haven't spoken, but I bet you have questions. Do you want to ask a question or make a comment?
Who are you talking to?
Esther Sitter.
Yes, I just remind you that it's nearly 2 o'clock in the morning in Switzerland.
I'm amazed
So
you're on.
I have soon to go to sleep. Thank you very much for showing this broad richness of experience in your life. And of course, it animates to reflect more about own details in life, how it was experienced or in a difference also. And it is interesting to see how you included various experiences with religion. And this, I think, is something which many of us, or maybe all of us who are present, did in some way. And I think this is what we in this organization also want and try to do, and share about it with each other.
Esther is on our international council and a minister in Switzerland and a leader in our international women's group. And Esther also is our primary IRF contact with the UN centers in Switzerland, particularly. And Esther, I hope you will be able to attend George Garland, who's also on the screen here. He's going to be our speaker next month and also later on. And I think you and he probably have a lot in common. He's been very involved with international agencies and with the United Nations Association. And I think he would be a resource for you and you could be a resource for him. So I hope that you'll be able to connect with one another. And he is in New York City.
Good to know.
Stephen has his hand up.
Oh, please. Who?
Yeah.
Stephen.
Yes. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge that it was thanks to Reverend Maruta that I was introduced to Rishoko Sekai when I was looking for a Buddhist home. And I was riding in the car with John. And I said, John, I found this Buddhist group and they're like a bunch of Unitarians. And he says, oh, you must mean Rishoko Sekai. So to me, it's all interconnected, right? Just like the net of Indra. And I'm currently studying the developing faith in the Mahayana attributed to Ashtagosha. So suchness is right there. My remark has to do with the fact that my acquaintances and friendships span generations. And when I consider the Gen X, Gen Z, the millennials, and even those who were born in the 60s and 70s, the whole idea of religion is something to be fled. Mm-hmm. And the fastest growing group of spiritual but not religious are young people today. Right. And when I look at my own grandnieces who are 18 and just turned 18 and 15, or even my own partner, growing up without any religion whatsoever, I think is a terrible loss. Because when I look at how the world is developing now, I think to myself, when I'm stressed out, I can go in and sit in front of my shrine and I can do my meditation, I can do my chanting to help bring down my blood pressure, okay? To help settle my mind, to develop that sense of equanimity that it's all suchness is what it comes down to. But I am so concerned about young people. And I really feel like we here and my generation have a responsibility to somehow model the positive effects of spirituality, regardless of whether we're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Sikh, whatever. Right. But we have a really strong responsibility, I believe. And when you talked about how you were brought up, my mom's lesson to me was never get in the gutter to look the other guy in the eye. Hmm. My dad's lesson was to, if you don't vote, you don't get to complain. And my grandmother's lesson was that I'm here on earth for a reason. And it's my responsibility to leave this world better off for my having been here. And yeah, I really relate to these early teachings, and I suspect that every single one of us here had something like that when we were a kid that put us on the path to trying to do something to show compassion, yeah, karuna, compassion, caring, love for the people around us. And how do we go about doing that for these younger generations who, they're tied to their cell phones because they have nothing else to tie to. They're attached to something that's so ephemeral. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, no, I think that what you're saying is very important. My wife, Kathleen Moran, and I have had the great blessing of basically doing a lot of grandparenting. We moved to San Francisco because the children and grandchildren coming along were going to be there, and basically we did that weekly with both families for their first decade of life and more. So, and I love being a parent. I found it really fulfilling to be a grandparent. So it's been part of the richness. And I think we should have the courage to do what you're suggesting and interact with young people. I know Janice does that as part of her work and has done it throughout her life as part of her life. But I think it's something we all ought to try to do. And they're not going to understand it exactly as perhaps another person of our age would, but they're going to get something. And if I don't care if afterwards all they remember is, well, this funny old bald-headed guy said such and so. But if they remember what the such and so was and it makes some sense, then that's pretty important. As some of you know, if you've taken a look at the book, one of the things that I say on a daily basis are words of Lao Tzu: creative endeavor without possession, action without aggression, development without domination. And these are my kind of lessons for life. So I don't practice them perfectly. I haven't gotten through a day, 100%, but they're very important to me. And I like the hymn in our older Unitarian hymnal from Confucius: grieve not yourself for want of place, or seek for easy praise, but fit yourself some task to do, to well employ your days. From wise and foolish both alike you shall all try to learn, for one can teach us how to live, the other what to spurn. Be fair to be able, be fair to those, be fair to those, okay. All right, senior moment. Be fair to those who err, and so anyway, you can look up the hymn, but it's a great hymn, and good words, I think. And those, to me, are just illustrations throughout the different religions of things that we can learn. Yeah, Anna's holding up. The most radical thing we can do is introduce people to one another. Right. Great idea. Good ending. And thank you so much. Thank you all so much for being here, and look forward to George Garland's the third Wednesday in May, and then Professor Kunihito Terasawa's, and I guess you'll be talking from Japan, won't you, Kuni? Yeah, great. Thank you all so much for being here. Goodbye. Hi, George.